Elden Ring Nightreign has been out for a couple weeks now, and now that I've sunken in even more hours into every single Nightfarer in the entire game, it's only natural that we do the most definitive tier list for every single character, ranking them perfectly, and not upsetting anybody in the comments whatsoever. So whether you're a newcomer to the Souls series and Elden Ring Nightreign is your first game, which I find hard to believe, or you're a veteran who's played the Souls series for over a decade, this video guide is going to help you understand some of the best characters and some of the, well, actually there are no bad characters in Elden Ring Nightreign. Every single character is actually quite balanced in this game, but there are some definite picks as to who is easiest to use and who is the strongest to use. So without further ado, let's get into our first character, John Nightreign himself, the Wylder. Wylder is one of the most solidified characters in all of Elden Ring Nightreign. Being able to start the match off with a good long-range weapon such as great swords, but also having the shielding capabilities, but also a good amount of stamina and HP. And that's before we've even talked about his passive, the ability to cheat death, which saves you constantly throughout your run, and I can attest that it has saved me countless times, which really adds to his survivability, especially when it does come into his actual skill, the claw shot, where he's able to use it to not only stagger small enemies or bring them to him, but he can also rip apart an enemy's guard as well, be pulled to larger enemies for strategic advantage, or even to use it for mobility purposes, or to straight up just ignore some enemies and some bosses' attack patterns. Not to mention he gets a ton of horizontal momentum, meaning you can long jump out of your claw shot as well. So the claw shot's extremely good for going in and being aggressive, but it's also a great evasive tool, but it's also good for like minor crowd control as well. And then talking about his ultimate, it is just straight up a solid ultimate. It deals big damage, big stagger, and with further upgrades can even create a small AoE of fire, which helps with spacing with enemies, but also helps to rack up damage on bosses as well. The Wylder is just such a solidified character amongst all of the Nightfarers in Elden Ring Nightreign, with him being such a solidified character with his survivability, with his passive to cheat death, having mobility, having crowd control, and even having an extremely strong ultimate art, and with good range with weapons that he prefers like greatswords, and being mostly of strength and dexterity qualities, there's no doubt in my mind that Wylder easily lands himself into S tier. Our next Nightfarer, everybody's favorite bird man. The Guardian in Elden Ring Nightreign, in my opinion, is actually kind of slept on. I think a lot of other tier lists out there and a lot of other people placing his rankings have him at the bottom of a tier list. However, I think that the Guardian is extremely strong in Elden Ring Nightreign, and I'm going to lay out why. Guardian starts off with great equipment with halberds having really good range, but also having a great shield to boot, and having one of the highest HP pools in the game makes him an absolute tank. And in Elden Ring Nightreign, it's all about surviving the night. So he comes with a weapon that's great for guard counters, but also his passive allows him to have literally a better block than every single other Nightfarer in the game, as he takes a special stance to actually get extremely great guard boosting capabilities, which lend to his survivability. And now a lot of people say that Guardian doesn't really deal a whole ton of damage, but I don't feel like that's the point of the Guardian. I feel like the Guardian's purpose is literally in his namesake, as when it does come to his actual character skill, the Whirlwind, and we're not talking about the upgraded version of Whirlwind that ticks for like 5 whole seconds, we're talking about the normal Whirlwind is just such a nice and easy mob clear and absolutely tosses enemies up. The damage is also nothing to scoff at, especially when it does come for mob clearing. It's not the best thing in boss fights, but that's fine because Guardian really does shine with his ultimate art. His ultimate art does damage on impact and literally reses everybody for free. Not only this, but Guardian can also hold his ultimate art down to raise a defensive aura that protects everybody inside it and literally makes them invulnerable to any damage oncoming. This ultimate art is insane and one of the best ultimate arts in the game, and it really cannot be understated. So I really don't understand where a lot of the discourse for Guardian is coming in. I feel like it usually just comes down to his DPS output, but I really don't think like that's the point of the Guardian in Elden Ring Nightreign, especially as it is a cooperative multiplayer based game. So he doesn't really have that many drawbacks, except for his skill not really being the best during boss fights. But in my opinion, that's not really a good reason to knock him down to the bottom of characters, especially when it comes to character rankings. Guardian easily hits A tier in my opinion, but I could easily consider him for the S tier as well. Next up, the actual fan favorite character of Elden Ring Nightreign, the Ironeye. Ironeye is, how should I say, extremely ridiculous on how easy it actually is to play him. Now, bows in Souls games typically aren't the best, but in Elden Ring Nightreign, they really did make Ironeye work, especially having an infinite amount of arrows. This allows Ironeye to simply just pelt enemies from afar constantly. And while bows don't deal the most amount of damage, Ironeye's DPS uptime is so incredibly amazing that he's typically probably the best damage dealer throughout the entire run sometimes. Now, he doesn't have the most amount of health, but that's where his bow comes in, and especially his character skill, the Mark. As when the pressure even is put on him, Ironeye simply just zips through enemies, slashing them with his dagger, applying a mark, which allows for extra damage from him and even his other allies, but the skill also has iframes on it, meaning that he's protected as well. And since he's on the other side of the enemy all of a sudden, the enemy has to reposition and turn around, all while Ironeye is probably already flinging arrows at them once again. Ironeye is so incredibly simple with his game plan, and it doesn't stop there, as his ultimate art also has a ton of iframes on it as well, and does huge damage to bosses and enemies, and even goes through terrain, meaning it always hits its mark. Now, when it comes to Ironeye's passive, however, he simply has a higher item discovery for him and his allies. Now, truth be told, I personally don't feel like this is the greatest passive. I know a lot of people think that item discovery is extremely nice in Elden Ring Nightreign because it's a Souls-like and you want the good drops. However, in my Ironeye experience, and I've sunken in countless hours, it really doesn't add up to much. Sometimes enemies will drop an item here and there, but even then I typically just get gray or normal rarity drops. It's not exactly the best passive in the game, and I definitely would prefer something that actually works to the character's advantage when it comes to an actual practical use. But with Ironeye's crazy survivability with his mark ability, being able to stay very far away from the enemy, and even having an ultimate art with crazy iframes and good stagger on it, and I'm not even a crazy huge fan of Ironeye myself, but I cannot deny that he just simply is an S tier character. Everybody's favorite waifu in Elden Ring Nightreign, the Recluse. Now, I know that this is a fan favorite character of a lot of players, mostly because she's probably like one of the hottest characters in the game, but she also is a spellcaster, and spellcasting is extremely popular in Elden Ring and other Souls-likes, and even I just love spellcasting in these games. The Recluse is an amazing character when it does come to her scaling and intelligence, but she also is great with faith as well, as her scaling with faith comes in at an S rank. However, there typically is a huge downside to Recluse, and I'm going to get into that in a second here. Well, first let's talk about how the Recluse starts out. The Recluse starts out with a simple staff, and she can fire glintstone sorceries and arcs as well. The Recluse has the best FP mana pool in the game, and through her passive, she's also able to restore her own FP on her own, and that is through the use of her skill, the Magic Cocktail. As Recluse does collect mana, but more importantly, elemental residues from the last elemental damage affinity type that was placed on an enemy or even an ally, Recluse can combine up to 3 different elemental affinity types to create different spells based on the combination of the elemental affinities that you've acquired. Okay, so that's a lot to process. Basically, Recluse is actually extremely nice in team coordination, especially when you are good at identifying which elemental residues you want for the right combination, as some combinations actually can give party-wide buffs to everybody. But her ultimate art, I'd argue, is even better, as Recluse can place blood sigils on enemies all around everybody, starts allowing them to restore HP and FP whenever they are dealing damage to said enemies. So she's extremely great in the supportive type role as well, and she can also deal a ton of damage depending on if she collects the right stabs in her playthrough. However, the biggest flaw that I've actually had with Recluse is she's extremely difficult to play. Not only do you need to not get carried away with using too much FP, you also need to manage it by restoring it, but also collecting the right elemental residues for the right combinations of spells that you want, and that's only depending on if you have the proper team coordination and understanding what your team is using for elemental affinities, or by applying the elemental affinities yourself. Not only this, but her spell casting time is also a little bit slow, meaning Recluse is very open to damage, especially as enemies can close in on her extremely quickly. And the Recluse is an extremely squishy character in Elden Ring Nightreign, meaning she has an extremely hard time getting some breathing room. On top of all this, her spells also take a crazy amount of stamina to cast as well, which in my opinion, they should buff her by reducing that stamina cost. Therefore, she's going into the B tier category, but in the right and capable hands of the right player, she could easily be considered an S tier character. I think that the Duchess is actually another fan favorite character in Elden Ring Nightreign. The Duchess is one of the most agile characters in the game. But not only this, but she also has her own dagger moveset and her own dodging moveset as well, as they come through her passive, the Magnificent Poise, allowing her to use less stamina than other Nightfarers when it comes to her dodging, but also being able to dodge 2 times in succession and being able to dodge in the middle of her combos, but still being able to complete the combo combo without losing the actual combo progression. Duchess is proficient with dexterity, but is also really good with intelligence as well. And since her starting dagger does come with a magical buff that she can apply to it, this means that the Duchess can actually be used in multiple different ways. And so it's actually extremely viable for her to get a staff for spellcasting as well. Now, Duchess doesn't really have a lot of team-wide synergy except for her ultimate art, which we're going to get into in a sec. But let's talk about her actual skill right now, her pocket watch, or whatever it's called. Her pocket watch allowing her to rewind the last couple of seconds of damage that have been applied on enemies, with further upgrades it being able to be applied to enemies in the entire area as well. It allows her to absolutely nuke enemies and bosses' health bars sometimes. Not like the entire health bar, but it is a huge and considerable chunk of damage, especially if she can coordinate with someone like the Wylder or the Ironeye as well, dealing big damage with their ultimate arts. However, the pocket watch isn't the easiest thing to time, as if you aren't very good with your coordination or you're playing with randoms, it's hard to know when they're going to use their ultimate art and whether you should just be using it at every single moment or not after a full complete dagger combo from the Duchess, or if you should be saving it waiting for the expected ultimate art, but in that case ultimately not dealing as much damage as you could and not keeping up a good DPS uptime. And DPS uptime isn't really the biggest thing for all the Nightfarers in the game, as I have stated before, that the survivability is actually extremely important in Elden Ring Nightreign, as that's the point of the game. Making it through the night, Duchess has more of the tools to just rack on a ton of damage herself while being extremely nimble and agile, and so she's not exactly the best team player, but she absolutely can amplify what her and her team is doing to the utmost. But it is purely offensive based. Now when it comes to her ultimate art, being able to turn her and her allies invisible, even in the middle of boss fights, to lose aggro, this ultimate art is actually extremely strong in the right circumstances. As when Duchess is the only person standing, it means that she can actually take aggro off of herself and start wailing on her allies to actually get them back up extremely comfortably and extremely easily as well. Therefore, Duchess ult isn't really exactly the best thing, and I actually find that it's better to save it for clutch circumstances such as that. And so it doesn't exactly deal damage on impact. Duchess ult is pretty unique, and I think that it does have more multiplayer synergy than people actually think. Therefore, while the Duchess is extremely good for absolutely nuking enemies' health bars and having a little bit of trickery with her ultimate art, she's not the easiest character to play, but she is extremely strong, landing her directly into the A tier category. Next up, one of the most slept on characters in Elden Ring Nightreign, I swear to God, ladies and gentlemen, Terra Knights, ugh. Raider is so extremely strong in Nightreign, it's not even funny, and people are absolutely sleeping on this character. Yeah, he's not the coolest looking character in the game like the Wylder or the Ironeye, and he's not the hottest character like Recluse. Well, actually, unless you like huge, big, buff men. No, jokes aside, Raider has everything going for him, and I think that people are not seeing that. First off, talking about Raider's weapon category type, he prefers colossal weapons, but anything that just does big damage through strength-based weapons. Raider starting off with a colossal weapon and even being able to get his hands on a second colossal weapon of the same weapon type allows him to be an absolute monster when it does come to huge damage, but also huge stagger when it comes to using both colossal weapons at the same time through dual wielding. But even then, two-handing is also extremely viable on Raider as well. His attacks are extremely slow, but who cares when his range is absolutely insane, and the stagger that he can apply on enemies through these heavy-hitting weapons is extremely reliable for himself but also his teammates. And yes, he is a little bit vulnerable when he is doing these attacks. However, the Raider has a huge health pool and a good stamina pool at that. His health pool isn't exactly technically as high as the Guardians, but the Raider in an offensive sense has plenty of health. And with the idea of him trading with enemies a lot of the time, his character is actually built around that when it comes to his retaliate skill. His retaliate allows him to have impervious hyper armor, allowing him to do a huge stomp which damages enemies, and he can soak up damage during this animation and deliver a huge headbutt. And when he's accumulated 850 HP points of damage as well, his retaliate's also upgraded until he uses it next time, delivering a huge uppercut to enemies and staggering even the largest of bosses. And I think that people are failing to realize just how good Raider is because they don't understand how the retaliate works. Not exactly their fault. Elden Ring Nightreign doesn't really explain it very well, but that is how it works. Once he's accumulated 850 points of damage, his retaliate does get buffed into the uppercut version. And since since Raider does want to be on the front lines, being able to use his retaliate to get through an attack instead of dodge rolling is actually the way to go with Raider, as he only does more damage the more damage that he takes, meaning that Raider is a great offensive ally whose sole focus is staggering enemies and dealing big damage and soaking up a ton of damage himself as well. And on top of all this, we haven't even talked about his ultimate art, the Totem Stella. Raider's ultimate art, Totem Stella, is a little bit weird under the right circumstances, or should I say wrong circumstances. Now, the Totem Stella has a few things going for it. It deals damage and stagger on impact. It creates a platform for you and your allies to use, or even a wall to hide behind, and it even provides an offensive buff to everybody around the Totem Stella. Now, a lot of people don't like this ultimate art because it can be a little bit janky sometimes, and sometimes bosses can get stuck inside of the Totem Stella. However, there's something that people are actually failing to realize, and even I didn't realize it at first too, my brother had to point it out to me, is that sometimes even when the Totem Stella does trap the boss inside of it sometimes, really that's not even such a bad thing, as it gives you a little bit of breathing room to recollect yourself or maybe heal up or apply other buffs. And so the Totem Stella dealing damage, dealing good stagger, giving an offensive buff, but also sometimes accidentally trapping bosses inside of it, which isn't technically actually really a bad thing, kind of makes me think that Raider actually has everything going for him, especially as he is extremely tanky and reliable, and when in dire circumstances, especially if he's the last man standing or if he's trying to res allies, dual wielding two colossal weapons and doing jump attacks can literally clear a whole revive bar on one ally per hit. So with no doubt in my mind, Raider actually lands himself into the S tier category. Yes, you heard me right. Next up, the character that all the solo queuers and multiplayer use, and they immediately get clapped when they're halfway across the continent, that is Limveld, and then subsequently DC from your session. The Executor is a really cool character actually in Elden Ring Nightreign. He's the character in Elden Ring Nightreign that everybody loves, hates, or even loves to hate on, kind of like longsword users from Monster Hunter. Now the Executor is all about his execution, no pun intended, as he's actually a very hard character to use, as his main gimmick is that he has an actual parry in samurai sword stance. But first off, let's talk about how he does start off with katanas. Executor is actually extremely strong from the get-go, as he does start with a dexterity-based katana weapon that actually does have bleed status applied to it, as most katanas do go in Elden Ring and Souls games, meaning he's extremely strong against any enemies that bleed, and with katanas having good fast attacks and really good range as well, Executor is extremely strong from the get-go. And I do want to talk about his skill, but let's talk about his other abilities first, as the skill is the most important part of him. Running through them real quick, his passive allows him to get extra damage when he recovers from status ailments. Not exactly the best passive, although against certain bosses in the game, this can be extremely strong, especially because you know ahead of time that they're going to inflict a status ailment on you. Executor's main playstyle is kind of more of a solo playstyle in a sense, but his beast form is extremely good, especially when the pressure is put on him, because his health bar does transform. He gains a ton of health going into his beast form. He has a new moveset which does good damage in a very, very good radius and area, but also deals really good stagger as well. And even things like his roar and him having new abilities like being able to roar can even start rezzing down to allies from a distance. And with him having a higher HP pool, this is an extremely reliable way for him to survive or to get allies up. So Executor's ultimate art is actually extremely strong. Now let's talk about his actual skill, his parrying stance. Executor taking a special stance is a little bit jarring for a lot of players. He's able to deflect pretty much any attacks in the game, as long as you have the proper timing for every subsequent hit that you're going to be parrying. However, most players do fail to actually utilize this properly, or maybe I should just say it flat out, a lot of players suck at using this skill. However, this skill is actually extremely rewarding with the right and capable hands, especially as the more attacks that you do deflect with, your cursed sword katana actually gets imbued with special energy that can be applied through another special attack in his parry stance as well, leading to extremely good damage and a great flow with the Executor. However, if you're playing the Executor and you're not utilizing this skill properly and you're just using him for his ultimate art, especially as his passive doesn't really proc all the time and simply just gets him extra damage, the Executor turns into another character where you may as well just be playing another character entirely. However, practice makes perfect, and with enough practice and in the right and capable hands, as I stated before, Executor is actually one of the strongest Nightfarers in Elden Ring Nightreign. So while being extremely strong and having a little bit of team utility, but mostly being offensive based, Executor is easily going to land his place into the A tier category. Next up, one of my favorite characters in Elden Ring Nightreign, Revenant actually was a character that I wasn't really excited for. However, as soon as I started playing her, I realized that she's actually extremely fun in her playstyle. And so I'm easily going to rank her S tier, right? Right? Okay, alright, here we go. So the Revenant is one of the hardest characters to play in Elden Ring Nightreign, and it's for multiple different reasons, whether it comes to extreme difficulty or her being a little bit lackluster. Yes, I said it, I love Revenant, I actually main Revenant in Elden Ring Nightreign, you have to believe me. However, because of that, I feel like I know this character extremely well, so bear with me as I get into Revenant here. Revenant's one of the squishiest characters in the game alongside the Recluse, and Revenant does have a great FP pool, and Revenant has great faith scaling as well, but the Recluse already comes in at an S category with faith and sorceries as well, which doesn't mean that Revenant doesn't shine compared to the Recluse. However, the Revenant not being able to restore her own FP is a little bit troublesome, as to restore your FP, you're going to need another Recluse on your team, or you simply need to collect Starlight Shards, which isn't actually the hardest thing to do in Elden Ring Nightreign. And that's where Revenant does come into actually understanding how to play the character itself, and I think that a lot of players are failing to recognize that she does have a lot more going for her. It's just hard to figure out, because the Revenant does start with some healing abilities with a seal in the beginning of the game, but she also has her own special claw weapon, which can be extremely strong under the right circumstances as well. But because she's the squishiest character in the game, it's hard to go up close to enemies and use her claw weapon, especially starting out at the beginning of the run. But that is where her skill comes in with her special summons. She's able to summon 3 ghost familiars. This is where the Revenant gets a little bit tricky, as she can only have 1 spirit out at a time. Well, at least for purposely summoned spirits, as she can get more spirits from enemies that she kills. It's just based on RNG whether you get a spirit from them, which can be extremely useful in her building up an absolute army. But because Revenant is so squishy, she doesn't actually start out with any faith incantations from the get-go of the game, meaning she has to find her own seal to deal holy damage, but also not having the most reliable way to restore her FP. A lot of the time you're going to be up close with Revenant dealing damage from a melee perspective, which does go against the character's health pool. And so in my opinion, you have to make use of your summons extremely well and wait for them to go in and wait for your opportunity to actually capitalize on the battle in front of you. This means that you're playing a secondary role to your summons a lot of the time, and making sure that they actually stay alive and playing a more supportive role for the whole team in general, especially when it does come to her ultimate art as well, as her ultimate art actually does res all allies on the field, which can be extremely clutch and is one of the best ultimate arts in the game, just like the Guardians. And with further upgrades, it can also get a Ghost Flame Explosion on it, but it also gives a buff for a while that allows everybody to not die even if their HP has reached 0. Now this ultimate art is a little bit situational, but it can be an absolute run saver. This is why I love Revenant in Elden Ring Nightreign. However, as I talked about before, her health being extremely low, her sometimes needing to rely on dealing melee damage, all while having to manage your ghost spirit familiars, and needing to rely on restoring your own FP through a secondary means, which isn't the hardest thing to do, means that Revenant is one of the trickiest characters to play in the game, even more so than the Executor in my opinion. I have to also put the Revenant in the B tier category. However, as I did say at the beginning of the video, there are actually truly no bad characters in Elden Ring Nightreign. It really does come down to player skill and how you actually properly apply these characters, especially in a multiplayer setting. The characters in Elden Ring Nightreign are actually extremely fun, and I'm just so surprised still with how much I'm really truly enjoying Elden Ring Nightreign and how much Elden Ring Nightreign is actually thriving. But that's gonna wrap up the tier list and my yapping at the end of this video, guys and gals. Terra Knights, hope you had a good one. What do you think of my placements on the tier list? Which character do you main in Elden Ring Nightreign, and which tier do they actually deserve? And is Ironeye as good as everybody makes him out to be? Let me know in the comments down below. But that's all I've got for today, guys and gals. Terra Knights, hope you had a good one. This has been Terrorizer. I'm signing off, and I'll catch y'all in the next one. Peace!